was an unforgettable experience, coming as it did so opportunely with America's entry into the war. I shall always have it in the background of memory, and one day it will be among the pleasantest of many pleasant tales which I shall have in store for my grandchildren. However, it is not their potentialities as memories which endear these adventures now, but rather it is because they are in such contrast to any that we have known before. We are always comparing this new life with the old, so different in every respect as to seem a separate existence, almost a previous incarnation. Having been set right about my course, I pushed my biplane to more level ground, with the willing help of all the boys, started my motor, and was away again. Their shrill cheers reached me even above the roar of the motor. As a lad in a small Middle Western town, I have known the rapture of holding to a balloon guy rope at a county fair, until the world's most famous aeronaut shouted, "Let her go, boys!" and swung off into space. I kept his memory green until I had passed the first age of hero worship. I know that every youngster in a small village in central France will so keep mine. Such fame is the only kind worth having. A flight of 15 minutes brought me within sight of the large white circle which marks the landing field at R. J.B. had not yet arrived. This was a great disappointment, for we had planned to race home. I was anxious about him, too, knowing that the godfather of all adventurers can be very stern at times, particularly with his aerial godchildren. I waited for an hour and then decided to go on alone. The weather having cleared, the opportunity was too favorable to be lost. The cloud formations were the most remarkable that I had ever seen. I flew around and over and under them, watching at close hand the play of light and shades over their great billowing folds. Sometimes I skirted them so closely that the current of air from my propeller raveled out fragments of shining vapor, which streamed into the clear spaces like wisps of filmy silk. I knew that I ought to be savoring this experience, but for some reason I couldn't. One usually pays for a fine mood by a sudden, unaccountable change of feeling which shades off into a kind of dull, colorless depression. I passed the twin-motor Caudron going in the opposite direction. It was fantastically painted, the wings a bright yellow, and the circular hoods over the two motors a fiery red. As it approached, it looked like some prehistoric bird, with great ravenous eyes. The thing startled me, not so much because of its weird appearance as by the mere fact of its being there. Strangely enough, for a moment it seemed impossible that I should meet another avion. Despite a long apprenticeship in aviation, in these days when one's mind has only begun to grasp the fact that the mastery of the air has been accomplished, the sudden presentation of a bit of evidence sometimes shocks it into a moment of amazement bordering upon incredulity. As I watched the big biplane pass, I was conscious of a feeling of loneliness. I remembered what J.B. had said that morning. There was something unpleasant in the isolation. It made us look longingly down to earth, wondering whether we shall ever feel really at home in the air. I, too, longed for the sound of human voices, and all that I heard was the roar of the motor and the swish of the wind through the wires and struts, sounds which have no human quality in them, and are no more companionable than the lapping of the waves to a man adrift on a raft in mid-ocean. Underlying this feeling, and no doubt part of responsible for it, was the knowledge of the fallibility of that seemingly perfect mechanism which rode so steadily through the air, of the quick response that ingenious arrangement of inanimate matter would make to an eternal and inexorable law, if a few frail wires should part, of the equally quick but less phlegmatic response of another fallible mechanism, capable of registering horror, capable, it is said, of passing its past life in review in the space of a few seconds, and then capable of becoming equally inanimate matter. Luckily, nothing of this sort happened, and the feeling of loneliness passed the moment I came in sight of the long rows of barracks, the hangars and machine shops of the aviation school. My joy when I saw them can only be appreciated in full by fellow aviators who remember the end of their own first long flight. I had been away for years. I would not have been surprised to find great changes if the Brevet Monitor had not come hobbling out to meet me holding an ear trumpet in his withered hand. The sight would have been quite in keeping with my own sense of the lapse of time. However, he approached with his ancient, springy, businesslike step. As I climbed down from my machine, I swallowed to clear the passage to my ears, and heard him say, "A voice cava," in a most disappointingly perfunctory tone of voice. I nodded. "Where's your biograph?" "My biograph? It is the altitude registering instrument which also marks, on a cross-line chart, the time consumed on each lap of an aerial voyage. My card should have shown 4 neat outlines in ink, something like this: one for each stage of my journey, including the forced landing when I had lost my way. But having started the mechanism going upon leaving A, I had then forgotten all about it, so that it had gone on running while my machine was on the ground as well as during the time I was in the air. The result was a sketch of a magnificent mountain range, which might have been drawn by the futurist son, aged 5, of a futurist artist. Silently I handed over the instrument. The monitor looked at it and then at me, without comment. But there is an international language of facial expression, and this said unmistakably, "You poor simple prune! You choice sample of mouldy American cheese!" J.B. didn't return until the following afternoon. After leaving me oversea, he had blown out 2 spark plugs. For a while he limped along on 6 cylinders, then landed in a field 3 kilometres from the nearest town. His French, which is worse, if that is possible, than mine, aroused the suspicions of a patriot farmer, who collared him as a possible German spy. Under a bodyguard of 2 peasants armed with hoes, he was marched to a neighboring château, and then, I should have thought, he would have had another historic illusion, this time with a French revolutionary setting. He says not, however. All his faculties were concentrated on enjoying this unusual adventure, and he was wondering what the outcome of it would be. At the château he met a fine old gentleman who spoke English with that nicety of utterance which only a cultivated Frenchman can achieve. He had no difficulty in clearing himself. Then he had dinner in a hall hung with armor and hunting trophies, as shown to be a chamber half as large as the lounge at the Harvard Club, and slept in a bed which he got into by means of a ladder of carved oak. This is a mere outline. Out of regard for J.B.'s opinions about the sanctities of his own personal adventures, I refrain from giving further details. These were the usual experiences which every American pilot has had while on his brevet flights. As I write, I think of scores of others, for they were of almost daily occurrence. Jackson landed, unintentionally of course, in a town square and was banqueted by the mayor, although he had nearly run him down a few hours earlier, and had ruined forever his reputation as a man of dignified bearing. But the mayor was not alone in his forced display of unseemly haste. Many other town people, long past the nimbleness of youth, rushed for shelter, and pride goeth before a collision with a wayward aeroplane. Jackson said the sky rained hats, market baskets, and wooden shoes for 5 minutes after his Beloit had come to rest on the steps of the Bureau de Poste, and no one was hurt. Murphy's defective motor provided him with the names and addresses of every possible and impossible Marianne in the town of Y, near which he was compelled to land. While waiting for the arrival of his mechanician with a new supply of spark plugs, he left his monoplane in a field close by. A path to the place was worn by the feet of the young women of the town, whose dearest wish appeared to have an aviator as a filibuster. They covered the wings of his avion with messages in pencil. The least pointed of these hints were, "Echevez la portant possible," and "J'avais been un faithful American, très génial, comme vous." Matthew's biplane crashed through the roof of a camp bakery. Had he practised this unusual atterrissage 1,000 times, he could not have done it so neatly as at the first attempt. He followed the motor